certainly I attended the summit, and being mindful that it was the first summit with us as a new commission, from our chairperson, deputy chairperson, and of course ourselves as commissioners. And it was a first meeting since 2022. So there's been a bit of a gap. So it was quite strategic and pivotal for us to have that conversation and to have the level of representation by European Union, and of course also African heads of states that were there, was quite encouraging around, one, confirming that this relationship is strategic, confirming that the contribution of the European Union to Africa's development continues to be necessary. Um, but we also need to have conversations around how we strengthen and improve the collaboration to be responsive to our most pressing development needs. One being infrastructure, where we have a huge infrastructure deficit, and that requires quite a huge amount of financing. Number one, huge amount of technical know-how that needs to be homegrown, as it were, and certainly also around the overall technical capacity building for different aspects of our member states, different areas, whether it's the regulators or the policymakers, etc. And we recognize that the EU has really been quite instrumental in advancing some of the strategic collaborative areas. But what we are looking for going forward for the future of the relationship, we are saying, how do we reduce the donor dependence in the relationship? We do have to have a way in which our partnership is comes from a position of strength for both sides, and we have a long-term, medium-term view to doing that. So that's one of the areas that came up, and it was also linked to Africa's own domestic resource mobilization agenda, and to say, how do we then leverage global partnerships in support of Africa's domestic resource mobilization agenda? I think the current geopolitics and developments and reduction in financial support from external partners from the African continent compel us to find strategic ways of being autonomous and maintaining our partnerships with the understanding that autonomy is a key principle. So what was refreshing is that our EU partners understand that, they get it, because I think also as EU member states in particular, they also are facing the pressure, fiscal pressures that are affecting the entire globe. So also from the part of EU member states, they can't necessarily operate from the premise that the financial resources they've had to deploy to the continent to support some of our development priorities will still be available at the value or at the volume that it is. So it was a good opportunity for us then to begin to co-create what could be a model for continuing and advancing our collaboration, but understanding the dynamics that we have to reduce the donor dependency and be much more focused on investments, focused on industrial development, focused more on concrete projects that connect us. And the key projects that the EU has participated in, for example, has been some of the corridors, the development of the cross-border corridors on the continent. And our view and our priority as a continent is to say, we want that connectivity, but we also want it to be linked to industrial nodes, right? Because we don't want to maintain the pit-to-pot model of infrastructure planning, etc. And that finds resonance with our EU partners, which is encouraging, because it's about now, how do we begin to work together towards finding strategic industrial projects that we invest in along the corridors that the EU already supports through the gateway mechanism and other mechanisms. So all in all, quite a good and really progressive and constructive meeting that happened literally day after the G20 Leaders Summit. So I think also strategically the momentum for global development was already set. So the leaders came with that energy, which was quite helpful and impactful to the summit outcomes. I think Germany in particular, firstly, it's really to acknowledge that Germany has been quite a strategic anchor to a lot of our programs and interventions with member states on the continent. In particular, GIZ, I mean BMZ, and then cascading to the implementation entity GIZ, and we've had a number of workshops, technical capacity building interventions, all with the strategic aim of domesticating Agenda 2063 priorities. And GIZ has been a helpful partner to enable us to reach member states, because a lot of the interventions we do them at member state level, so it's not really necessarily all in Addis Ababa. Um, so we have to commend the contribution of Germany in that regard, because one is a very active partnership, and it's really focused on making real interventions, co-created with us, of course, not necessarily only what benefits Germany, but to advance a lot of the priorities we've set under Agenda 2063. One big area that Germany has focused on with us has been the digital agenda. I think there's been a lot of workshops, for example, on data governance, on the overall digital ecosystem, from policy to getting to digital infrastructure issues. Even as we speak, I believe during the summit there was a data governance workshop that was co-hosted with Outer NEPAD and GIZ to advance a lot of these issues, and that continues. The other area that has been of interest to Germany as well has been around the climate agenda. I think as a country, climate resilience, and for us, of course, having climate responsive infrastructure delivery across the board, whether it's transport, whether it's energy, it's quite important to us. So there's been alignment there with Germany. And I do believe, but I stand to be corrected, I do believe that also in the broader EU ecosystem, Germany should be our largest partner financially. So that in itself is quite an important aspect to note. So it speaks to Germany's commitment to Africa's development, and to, again, they were also part of the conversations of how do we then co-create a future that then also, one, reduces the donor relationship, but we focus more on the investment partnership, on the innovation and technology co-creation partnership, because we also want homegrown African innovation. So how do we support an innovation ecosystem, leveraging, for example, Germany, for that ecosystem to come up? So we are now moving beyond just saying technology transfer flow from Germany to Africa. We're saying we want homegrown innovation. Can we create that ecosystem together with our partners like Germany? And it's encouraging, because these conversations are finding resonance, because when all is said and done, the world is recognizing and realizing that there will be no global prosperity without Africa. So all of us then must come together and come up with a real plan around how do we grow the global economy, and how do we ensure that Africa is not left behind, and Africa continues to contribute to global prosperity for all the other regions, including the continent itself. I think firstly it's about how do we accelerate our agreed priorities. One thing that we have with Europe is a clear plan, particularly the support that we've received through EU and the different EU member states for the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, PIDA program. The PIDA program is a number of projects, cross-border, connecting the continent, multiple sectors. It's quite a pivotal program for us, and the EU has continued to support. But one key issue that that has been raised, and we are still working towards joint resolution of it, is, for example, even in the Gateway program, how do we turn pledges and commitments into real deployment of resources? So that factor becomes critical, because there, there's a lot of commitments made to say, and I'll use the Gateway program again as an example, because I think that's the flagship of the EU vis-a-vis um, contribution to the continent. There'll be a particular amount to say, this is the amount that we are pledging to deploy to projects on the African continent, or to different areas, whether it's technical capacity, all the different aspects of the Gateway. The reality is, and I recall our chairperson raised the matter when we had the ministerial in Brussels in preparation for the summit. Um, the deployment number and the percentage was actually much lower than the commitment. So it's about dealing with the bottlenecks of how do we leverage the commitments in full. What are the joint areas we can work on to resolve if there's any issues of risk? Is it systemic, etc.? So we're working on accelerated implementation, but also looking at unlocking resources in real terms within the EU partnership. The next layer, of course, in as much as we are unlocking EU financial resources, we are looking at also bringing to bear African domestic resources. We've got our own study now that was launched in June, led by African Finance Corporation, that confirmed that we actually have 4.6 trillion US dollars on the African continent that is unleveraged and is not deployed in the real economy. It's sitting in pension funds, it's sitting in insurance instruments, etc., etc. So ours is to say, in as much as we are looking to unlock financing from our other partners, how do we unlock resources on the continent itself to then jointly, and I think recently President Thabo Mbeki made the speech last week to say that we need to create an African Marshall Plan. So all the global partners will come together with Africa and come up with a Marshall Plan for the continent to close the development gap so that global prosperity can be assured. Because an underdeveloped Africa continues to be a risk to global prosperity, as it were. So it's those kind of conversations around leverage EU, for example, EU resources, but how do we also bring African domestic resources to bear, and also it opens up conversations around other broader issues around financing, about Africa's financial leakage. Whether it's illicit financial flows or many other areas that the AU has spoken to over the years. So when we talk about next steps to partnerships, we'll have to be dealing with those issues so that the system is made efficient for us to in real term deliver on development. The most important area that we're advancing linked to critical minerals is the principle of beneficiation at source, meaning beneficiation on the African continent. So it's not really about curbing the flows of minerals, but it's about ensuring beneficiation at source, because we are quite mindful that every time we continue to export raw materials, be it mineral commodities or agricultural commodities, you're exporting jobs, for lack of a better term, because the beneficiation process can actually help you to employ much more people, to upskill much more people, etc. So the value for us is about beneficiation of the actual minerals out of the ground, and then happily export to the world. So the partnerships that we would have with any partner really in the world, Germany, because that's our focus of conversation for now. We would certainly welcome Germans' investment in beneficiation factories, as it were, the smelters, etc., that would be required on the African continent. And that's also a huge opportunity for any German investors in that regard, because the reality that we underscore and not underscore underappreciate, and we don't talk it up enough, is the level of returns on investment on the continent for any company. Many global companies will tell you about the extremely high levels of return on investment on the African continent. Um, so we are open for business in that regard, and would welcome investment in any mechanisms that ensure beneficiation at source, because it also goes back to the principle that we don't want to continue to work on infrastructure that maintains our pit to pot model. We upgrade a railway line that continues to take out unbeneficiated minerals. And while that's a good piece of infrastructure, but does it leave value behind for the citizens of that location or locale? So that's a key area. But also being mindful that the requirement for critical minerals, many of which are on the African continent, vis-a-vis digital infrastructure, will continue to grow. So now it's important that we ensure that the value chains that contribute to digital infrastructure development, whether it's the data centers, etc., that require a number of the minerals, have a lot of the value added on the African continent. And part of the conversations around co-creation and innovation will link to that agenda. Because one thing that as a continent we are clear about is that the continuation of just exporting raw materials unbeneficiated it's not sustainable. Yes, and the missing piece actually is actually the big opportunity. The missing piece for the most part would be energy, um, stable and reliable supply of energy, and affordable as well, to power the industries, the smelter that we need, because those are high energy consumers. So one of our big gaps is energy generation, upgrade of energy distribution lines, um, so that I could say is the big win for any German investor that can come and work with us to strengthen the grids, to look at modular energy supply to remote areas, so that we then take pressure off the grid and we deploy to large consuming industries that may require energy while we maintain electrification of households, etc. So so there's opportunity, but I think that the big issue is not lack of knowledge of where the opportunity is. And then there's risk aversion that we need to appreciate generally. I think the historical perceptions of Africa continue to cloud some of the investment decision making in boardrooms, while also the evidence will show you the return on investments is generally higher on the continent. But perception matters, right? So we are also mindful that as a continent, we work with our partners to demystify and to do away with perception. And thankfully social media and video based social media has been helpful to a degree, because I think people can see for themselves to say, but this is not the Africa that I'm told it is. Because you can see this, somebody's telling you I'm in the middle of Nairobi, and you're just surprised that Nairobi looks different to what you would have thought, or any other country on the continent. So we're making headway slowly, thankfully thanks to technology. So I'm hopeful that decision makers, people sitting in a boardroom in Berlin somewhere, without an African in the room making an investment decision about Africa, would at least have access to the ecosystem of information about Africa that helps to then take the risk on Africa and make the high return.